In March 1603, Richmond Palace stood above the Thames like a beautiful lie. From the river, its towers and high windows announced order, wealth, and royal permanence. Inside, corridors carried the muffled steps of servants, the smoke of candles, the scent of herbs burned to sweeten stale rooms, and the uneasy silence that gathers around a ruler who is dying, but will not admit that she can die. Queen Elizabeth I had ruled England for more than 44 years. To most of her subjects, she was not simply a woman. She was Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the survivor of plots, rebellions, war, and invasion. Her face appeared in portraits as smooth, pale, and strangely untouched by time. Pearls encircled her body. Jewels flashed like captured stars. Her clothes turned a mortal person into an emblem of the state. But the women standing nearest to her at Richmond did not see an emblem. They saw an exhausted body. They saw the monarch sitting for hours upon cushions on the floor, refusing food, refusing bed, refusing the ordinary surrender of sleep. They heard the weak changes in her voice. They watched her hands. They carried basins, cloths, cups, medicines, and messages. They waited beside a woman who had spent a lifetime controlling access to herself, and who now seemed determined to control even the manner in which death approached her. This is where the polished legend of Elizabeth meets the evidence left by the people who served her. Not in a painted gallery, but in a private room. Not beneath the open sky at Tilbury, where the Queen had once spoken to troops awaiting the Spanish Armada, but behind guarded doors where state ceremony could no longer conceal fatigue, grief, age, and fear. One eyewitness, Sir Robert Carey, remembered that cushions were laid for the Queen near the door of her closet so that she could hear divine service without going to chapel. He wrote that she remained upon cushions for at least 4 days and nights, while those around her failed to persuade her to eat properly or go to bed. A younger attendant, Elizabeth Southwell, later recorded a more ominous, more superstitious version of the final illness, filled with visions, strange sounds, and intimations of death. Their accounts do not agree in every detail. None should be treated as a perfect camera placed in the room. Yet together they show something the official portraits never could. The Queen's body was public property, but its decline was managed by servants. The title of this story promises something disgusting. The word is easy to use and difficult to examine. By modern standards, the Tudor court could be physically overwhelming. Chamber pots had to be emptied. Close stools had to be cleaned. Linen next to the skin absorbed sweat because heavily decorated outer garments could not simply be put into a washing tub. Hundreds of bodies crowded into palaces built without modern plumbing. Fires smoked. Tallow candles gave off their own odour. Kitchens roasted animals in immense quantities. Dogs moved through chambers. Stable yards lay close to elegant courtyards. Human waste, horse dung, spilled ale, damp rushes, perfume, incense, starch, food, smoke, wool, leather, and river mud combined in an atmosphere no painted portrait can reproduce. But the private truth revealed by Elizabeth's attendants is not the childish fantasy that everyone in the 16th century was permanently filthy and never wash. That myth is as misleading as the portraits. Tudors did wash. Linen was laundered. Rooms were cleaned, aired, and sometimes fumigated with herbs and spices. Water was used for drinking and bathing. Wealthy people could command scented water, fresh cloth, heated basins, and labour on a scale unimaginable to the poor. The shocking truth is more complicated. Elizabeth could be meticulously attended and still live in a world where bodily waste was handled by other human beings, where decayed teeth could turn royal breath sour, where cosmetics might conceal rather than cure, and where the physical labour required to make majesty appear effortless was pushed onto servants whose names were often barely recorded. To understand what those servants knew, we must first enter the England into which Elizabeth was born. On September 7th, 1533, at Greenwich Palace, Anne Boleyn gave Henry VIII a daughter, when almost everyone around the king had expected a son. The infant was named Elizabeth. Trumpets sounded, Heralds proclaimed the birth, and a royal household began to form around the child. A baby of the Tudor dynasty did not sleep alone in a quiet nursery watched only by two parents. She entered a machine of rank and service. A lady mistress supervised, nurses fed, washed, wrapped and carried her. Rockers tended the cradle, gentlewomen watched over clothing and linen. Servants kept fires, brought water, prepared food, moved furniture, delivered letters and recorded expenses. These people encountered Elizabeth before she could speak, before she could control her face, and before anyone knew whether history would remember her at all. One of the women later associated with that earliest service was Blanche Parry, who would claim in the inscription prepared for her monument that she had seen Elizabeth's cradle rocked. Whether she personally rocked it every night is less important than the extraordinary continuity of her presence. Blanche served Elizabeth for decades, from the uncertainty of childhood into the power of queenship. She would become a chief gentlewoman of the Privy Chamber and keeper of the Queen's jewels. Her life joined the helpless infant to the jewelled sovereign. In the middle stood years of danger, during which service to Elizabeth could mean proximity to disgrace, interrogation, or prison. When Elizabeth was 2 years and 8 months old, her mother was arrested. Anne Boleyn was accused of adultery and treason, condemned and executed inside the Tower of London in May 1536. The child who had been called Princess was declared illegitimate. Her household was reduced, her title altered. The material consequences were immediate. Margaret Bryan, one of the experienced women responsible for the royal children, complained that the little girl lacked suitable clothing. The future fashion icon, later surrounded by cloth of silver, velvet, pearls and embroidered emblems, began her fall from status with practical worries about gowns that no longer fit. Servants saw that transformation before the wider country did. A herald might alter a title in a document. A servant had to explain why the expected fabric had not arrived. Elizabeth's childhood trained her to understand that the private household was never truly private. Every affectionate bond might become political evidence. Every careless conversation could be repeated. Catherine Champernowne, better known as Cat Ashley, became governess and then one of the closest women in Elizabeth's life. She helped supervise the girl's education and offered a kind of maternal constancy after Anne Boleyn's death. Under tutors such as William Grindal and Roger Ascham, Elizabeth became an exceptional scholar, fluent in the languages of power and scripture. But learning took place inside a household where danger could enter through a bedroom door. After Henry VIII died in 1547, the teenage Elizabeth lived for a time in the household of her stepmother, Catherine Parr, who had married Thomas Seymour. Seymour was handsome, ambitious, reckless, and far too familiar with the young princess. Surviving interrogations describe morning encounters in which he entered Elizabeth's chamber, sometimes in his nightclothes, and engaged in behaviour presented as teasing, but charged with sexual danger. Cat Ashley initially appears not to have recognised or not to have resisted the seriousness of every encounter. Catherine Parr herself was involved in at least one episode of physical horseplay. Eventually, Elizabeth was sent away. When Seymour's ambition brought him down, Cat Ashley was arrested and questioned. Elizabeth's servants were forced to describe what had happened in rooms supposedly hidden from the world. The scandal taught the young woman a lesson she never forgot. Intimacy creates witnesses, and witnesses can be turned into weapons. Elizabeth answered interrogators with remarkable caution. She protected herself by controlling language, denying what could not be proved, and refusing to make an easy confession. This was not coldness born in a vacuum, it was survival learned in the household. Cat Ashley had seen Elizabeth in bedclothes and at lessons. She had also become a source for investigators. The same person could be nurse, confidant, liability, and evidence. Under the reign of Elizabeth's half-sister Mary I, suspicion grew more dangerous. In 1554, after Wyatt's rebellion, Elizabeth was taken by water to the Tower. The river journey led her toward the fortress where her mother had died. Members of her household accompanied her, among them women whose presence linked domestic loyalty to political courage. Isabella Markham, one of Elizabeth's attendants, is associated with this period of confinement. Cat Ashley was separated from her for a time. Letters were watched. Access was restricted. The private circle around Elizabeth became a shield, but every shield had gaps. The princess learned to speak through gestures, carefully phrased notes, and silence. When Mary died on November 17th, 1558, the 25-year-old Elizabeth inherited a kingdom divided by religion, strained by debt, and vulnerable abroad. According to tradition, she received the news beneath an oak at Hatfield and quoted the Latin phrase meaning that this was the Lord's doing and marvellous in our eyes. Whatever the precise theatrical shape of that moment, her accession changed the status of everyone near her. Women who had served a suspect princess now served the Queen of England. Familiar hands that had fastened modest gowns would handle robes of state. Familiar eyes would see a new household form around an old body. The royal household was not merely domestic staff enlarged to palace scale. It was a government, a theatre, a security system, an economy, and a map of political access. Outer rooms admitted wider circles of courtiers. The presence chamber displayed the monarch to the elite. The privy chamber restricted contact to the trusted. Deeper still, the bedchamber enclosed the most personal acts of dressing, undressing, sleeping, washing, eating, illness, and bodily relief. Under a male monarch, the intimate household had long offered favoured men extraordinary access. Under an unmarried queen, the gendered structure became especially sensitive. Women attended Elizabeth's body. Men might govern offices, guard doors, control finances, and advise on policy, but only a narrower female circle entered the spaces where the Queen ceased to be fully dressed for public view. That did not make these women powerless. Access itself was a political resource. A gentlewoman who could approach the Queen at a quiet hour might present a petition, mention a relative, soften anger, transmit a warning, or decide that the moment was too dangerous. Courtiers cultivated friendships with the Queen's women because a word spoken while Elizabeth's hair was being arranged might matter more than a memorandum left in an outer chamber. Yet the same closeness required obedience. A woman of the privy chamber lived within the Queen's emotional weather. Favour could warm her family. Anger could freeze it. At the centre of the daily ritual stood a body that could almost never be alone. Imagine the Queen's morning not as a single fixed schedule preserved minute by minute, but as a sequence of labour repeated across different palaces. Before Elizabeth appeared before councillors, ambassadors, bishops, petitioners, musicians, and crowds, servants had already been working. Fires needed tending. Light had to be admitted or candles replaced. Water had to be brought and, when required, warmed. Linen had to be ready. Garments selected in relation to season, ceremony, politics, and the Queen's mood. Jewels were removed from secure keeping and accounted for. Pins, laces, sleeves, partlets, petticoats, foreparts, ruffs, hoods, shoes, stockings, gloves, and fans passed through hands that rarely appeared in portraits. The Queen's clothing was architecture worn on the body. A linen smock touched the skin and absorbed sweat. Over it came layers that shaped the torso and built the silhouette. Stiffened bodies, petticoats, sleeves, a farthingale, rich outer fabric, and an expanding ruff transformed movement. The elaborate result restricted the body even as it magnified authority. Jewels, embroidered eyes, celestial symbols, roses, serpents, pelicans, phoenixes, pearls, and miniature scenes made the Queen readable as an idea. Dressing her was not simply personal grooming. It was the construction of the English monarchy every morning. Servants knew what the construction concealed. They saw the pressure marks left by stiff clothing, the warmth trapped under layers, the pins removed at night, the linen that had absorbed the day, the hairpieces lifted away, and the aging face released from formal display. They knew which shoulder ached, which shoe pinched, which tooth hurt, which garment had been stained, and which jewel had gone missing. A wardrobe record could note a lost pearl. A chamberer might remember the instant it caught on cloth. The Queen's image depended upon thousands of such moments being corrected before anyone important noticed. This is also where later myth has done its most seductive work. Modern retellings often present Elizabeth as a woman who covered herself with an inch-thick mask of poisonous white lead, left the paint on for a week, removed it with mercury, lost her hair, rotted her skin, and eventually died from cosmetics. The story is cinematic. It is also far more certain in popular culture than it is in the surviving evidence. Lead-based white cosmetics existed in early modern Europe. Pale skin carried associations of rank, health, and freedom from outdoor labour. Elizabeth's portraits increasingly showed a smooth, pale, idealised face. She certainly used preparations and cared intensely about appearance, yet direct proof for the full modern horror story, the exact substance, thickness, frequency, and fatal poisoning, is weak. Scholars have challenged the image of Elizabeth permanently encased in white lead. Her cause of death remains unknown because no reliable post-mortem diagnosis survives. The responsible historian must resist replacing one mask with another. The flattering portrait is not the whole truth, but neither is the monstrous caricature. Elizabeth survived smallpox in 1562, an illness that terrified the court and nearly killed her. It may have affected her skin, though claims of severe permanent scarring are not as secure as they are often presented. Cosmetics could smooth colour and assist the royal image. Paint in Elizabethan language meant cosmetic colour, and moralists criticised painted faces as deceptive. But the white face in a late portrait is also an artistic and political surface, not a forensic sample. It tells us how Elizabeth wished to be represented, not precisely what a servant mixed in a bowl that morning. Still, the attendant's work was intimate enough to expose realities no state portrait could admit. Elizabeth aged. The skin thinned and wrinkled. Hair could be supplemented with wigs and hairpieces, especially in the red-gold colour associated with her dynasty and youthful identity. Teeth decayed. In 1598, the German traveller Paul Hentzner saw the Queen at Greenwich and described her as majestic, with an oblong face that was fair but wrinkled, small dark eyes, narrow lips, and black teeth, which he attributed to the English appetite for sugar. His gaze was not that of a servant, but servants prepared the body he saw. They could not restore enamel. They could only manage the presentation around its loss. Sugar was one of the period's most dazzling luxuries. Imported through expanding networks of commerce and exploitation, it appeared in elite kitchens as a substance of wealth. Confectioners created elaborate subtleties and preserved fruits. Sweetened medicines blurred the line between treatment and indulgence. Comfits freshened the mouth while feeding the conditions that damaged teeth. For the poor, a blackened tooth might be ordinary suffering without relief. At court, decayed teeth could become perversely fashionable because they suggested access to expensive sugar. But pain ignored rank. A throbbing jaw beneath a jewelled headdress still throbbed. Elizabeth received small gold toothpicks and embroidered toothcloths among New Year's gifts. Such objects matter because they contradict the lazy claim that dental hygiene did not exist. People rubbed teeth with cloths, used powders or herbal preparations, picked between teeth, and attempted to sweeten breath. Their methods did not offer modern prevention, and some ingredients could make matters worse. A servant might present a scented cloth, toothpick, rinse, or sweet preparation. She could remove a cup when the Queen winced. She could notice that speech had become difficult after teeth were lost. An ambassador later complained that missing teeth made Elizabeth hard to understand. Diplomacy itself passed through an aging mouth. The smell of that mouth has attracted lurid stories, including the claim that Elizabeth stuffed perfumed cloth into it during audiences. The evidence for the most extreme versions is uncertain, and it would be dishonest to present rumour as daily fact. What is certain is more human and perhaps more unsettling. By late middle age, she had visibly damaged teeth. Tudor remedies could disguise odour without curing infection. The people near her, women fastening collars only inches from her face, physicians examining her, Counsellors leaning close to catch words experienced what portraits conceal. Royal breath was breath, vulnerable to decay. Washing, too, has been distorted by the desire to make the past disgusting. Tudor elites did not regard dirt as a virtue. Hands and faces were washed. Basins and ewers belonged to refined households. Linen next to the skin was changed and laundered. Wealthy bathers could use tubs, heated water, herbs and scented preparations. Palaces required laundresses, sometimes called lavenders, whose labour kept fine linen in circulation. The outer garments shown in portraits could not be washed like a modern shirt. Velvet, silk, metal thread, pearls and applied decoration demanded brushing, airing, spot cleaning, repair and protection. The washable layer was the smock, collar, cuff, ruff, partlet and other linen closer to the body. This system could produce an appearance of great cleanliness while concentrating unpleasant work out of sight. Sweat moved from royal skin into linen. A chamberer removed it. A laundress received it. Water had to be carried, heated, used, discarded and carried again. Soap might be coarse and made from fat and alkali. Stains were treated by knowledge passed through working hands. Fine pieces were dried, smoothed, starched, shaped and returned. When a ruff rose around Elizabeth's head like a white mechanical halo, the public saw royal fashion. The servants saw soaped linen, starch paste, hot irons, pins, and hours of repetitive labour. The famous ruff itself was a triumph of controlled discomfort. Starch allowed linen to project in elaborate folds, but weather, body heat, movement and moisture threatened the form. The Queen's starchwomen and silkwomen occupied a world where tiny failures became visible at the highest level. A collapsed edge could spoil the geometry around the monarch's face. A loose pin could scratch. A speck might attract Elizabeth's attention. Behind every apparently effortless portrait lay women hemming, starching, drying, mending, and reshaping. Alice Montague, a silk woman who supplied and worked upon royal linen, appears in surviving records connected with partlets, sleeves, embroidery, and fabric for the laundress. Such entries give us a rare glimpse of the network beyond the titled ladies of the Privy Chamber. Elizabeth's private appearance was not created only by noble companions. It depended on specialist craftswomen, laundresses, tailors, embroiderers, shoemakers, furriers, goldsmiths, perfumers, and carriers. Some worked close enough to touch garments that had touched the Queen. Others laboured in workshops far from the palace, never meeting the woman whose image depended on their precision. The wardrobe expanded across the reign into an archive of power. The surviving inventories are dense with fabric, colour, alteration, gifts, jewels, and loss. It is tempting to reduce this abundance to vanity. Elizabeth did love magnificence, and courtiers complained about the cost of competing for her attention. Yet royal clothing performed political work. England was not the richest monarchy in Europe. Its unmarried female ruler had to meet ambassadors who measured power through display. She used textiles and jewels as portable architecture. A gown could answer hostile propaganda. Pearls could advertise chastity. A pelican jewel could represent a mother feeding her young with her own blood, allowing the childless queen to become symbolic mother of the nation. The more vulnerable the natural body became, the more intensely the political body glittered. Servants stood at the seam, joining those two bodies. Blanche Parry kept jewels and helped control access. After Blanche's eyesight and health declined, responsibilities passed to women such as Mary Radcliffe. Every transfer required accounting because a single jewel might be worth a fortune. The attendants handled objects given by favourites, diplomats, petitioners, and hopeful courtiers. They knew which gift pleased Elizabeth, which reminded her of an old affection, which had been altered, which she wore repeatedly, and which disappeared into storage. Political history survives in proclamations and treaties. Private history also survives in a missing pearl, recorded because someone had to answer for it. The most private object in the royal chamber was not a jewel. It was the close stool. This was a portable toilet, built as a seat or box containing a removable pot, sometimes richly covered to suit elite surroundings. It could be upholstered, curtained, and placed within a stoolroom or private space. The elegance did not change its purpose. Elizabeth ate, digested, urinated, defecated, menstruated before menopause, suffered illness, and aged. At the bottom of monarchy sat a vessel that someone else emptied. Under Tudor kings, the groom of the stool became a powerful male courtier because physical intimacy with the monarch produced political access. Elizabeth's female body altered the arrangement. Women of the bedchamber and other trusted attendants managed bodily privacy. Surviving descriptions of exact duties are incomplete, partly because routine, intimate labour was less likely to be celebrated in official records. Yet the material logic is unavoidable. Pots did not empty themselves. Cloths did not wash themselves. Rooms did not sweeten themselves. The nearer a servant stood to the Queen's body, the more completely she encountered the contradiction at the centre of monarchy. A person treated as almost sacred still produced waste. The Queen's privacy was therefore made from the presence of selected witnesses. To be alone meant to be alone with trusted servants. One woman guarded a door, another slept nearby or shared the bedchamber. Another answered a call in darkness. The Queen might speak freely in front of women she regarded as extensions of household routine, yet those women heard names, fears, jokes, prayers, and angry words. They also saw the bodily rhythms that mattered to the succession. As long as Elizabeth remained unmarried and potentially fertile, menstruation was not merely personal. It bore upon the future of the dynasty. Foreign ambassadors speculated relentlessly about her ability to bear children. Physicians, ladies, and counsellors became trapped in the political inspection of a woman's body. We should be careful here. Popular history often invents precise gynecological secrets when the archive is silent. There is no trustworthy servant's diary giving a complete calendar of Elizabeth's cycles or proving a hidden pregnancy, secret child, or anatomical reason for virginity. Those fantasies reveal more about later appetites than about her. What the evidence does show is a court obsessed with marriage and succession. Elizabeth's women lived where those questions became personal. They dressed her for negotiations with potential husbands. They watched favourites enter and leave favour. They saw the Queen perform flirtation as diplomacy, while withholding the final commitment everyone demanded. Robert Dudley, later Earl of Leicester, stood closer to Elizabeth emotionally than any other man of her early reign. Their intimacy generated scandal almost immediately. In 1560, Dudley's wife Amy Robsart was found dead at the bottom of a staircase. An inquest concluded accidental death, but rumour accused Dudley and implicated the Queen. Within Elizabeth's private chamber, every smile toward him carried national consequences. Kat Ashley encouraged the possibility of marriage strongly enough to alarm William Cecil and others. Her position did not protect her from political rebuke. Once again, a maternal servant became entangled in the Queen's intimate choices. Elizabeth never married Dudley. She never married anyone. She converted unmarried status from a vulnerability into a language of rule, but the conversion took decades and demanded constant performance. She could be coy, jealous, tender, and ruthless. She referred to the people of England as all her husbands in one famous formulation, while using negotiations with foreign princes to shape alliances. Her women helped prepare her for meetings in which a change of sleeve, jewel, or colour could carry meaning. They also received the private aftermath when negotiations collapsed. The strain of this performance did not excuse cruelty. Elizabeth could be affectionate and generous to servants. She could also be verbally savage, controlling, and reportedly violent. Sir John Harrington, her godson, compared her smile to sunshine in which everyone wished to bask, followed by storms and thunder falling on all alike. The metaphor captures the emotional insecurity of service. A courtier could not resign after a bad afternoon and expect an ordinary life. Favour determined offices, marriages, income, and access. For women living in the chamber, the Queen's temper was not distant political weather. It broke directly above their heads. Nothing brought that temper down more reliably than a marriage concealed from the Queen. To a modern observer, Elizabeth's anger at the love lives of her attendants can look like simple possessiveness, an unmarried older woman punishing younger women for finding husbands. There was certainly an emotional element. She demanded loyalty and sometimes reacted as though a secret marriage were a personal betrayal. Yet court marriage was also political. A gentlewoman of the Privy Chamber belonged to a family network. Her husband might gain information, access, or influence. A pregnancy could remove her from service. If the woman possessed royal blood, marriage could produce a rival line to the throne. Elizabeth understood these dangers because her own mother's marriage had changed the kingdom, and because her youth had been shadowed by questions of legitimacy and succession. Lady Catherine Grey made the danger painfully clear. A granddaughter of Henry VIII's younger sister Mary, Catherine had a claim to the succession under Henry's will. She secretly married Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford, in 1560. When pregnancy exposed the union, Elizabeth sent both husband and wife to the Tower. The validity of their marriage was challenged because the witnesses could not be produced. Catherine gave birth in confinement, conceived again during illicit meetings with her husband, and bore another son. The Queen treated the marriage not as romance, but as a dynastic threat. Servants guarded doors, carried food, witnessed tears, and enforced the separation. In the Tudor world, a private bed could create a public crisis. The women of Elizabeth's own chamber absorbed the lesson, but desire and ambition did not disappear. Mary Shelton, later Lady Scudamore, served near the Queen and married John Scudamore without permission. Reports of Elizabeth's reaction are ugly. One source said the Queen was liberal with blows and harsh words. A later claim, transmitted through hostile conversation, alleged that Elizabeth struck Mary with a candlestick and broke her finger. The exact details cannot be proved beyond doubt, and the most dramatic accusation comes through layers of reporting. But the story was plausible to contemporaries because Elizabeth's physical anger was no secret. She pinched, struck, or verbally humiliated people when enraged. Majesty did not always maintain the stillness shown in portraits. For Mary, the injury, whether exactly as later described or less dramatic, would have been only one part of the punishment. Losing access meant losing opportunity. A woman dismissed from the chamber might find her family's petitions ignored, her husband's career stalled, and her own reputation marked by disobedience. Elizabeth sometimes restored offenders because she needed experienced attendants and because her anger could cool. The relationship between queen and servant could survive storms, but it rarely returned to innocence. Elizabeth Throckmorton, known as Bess, faced another famous explosion. She was a gentlewoman of the Privy Chamber when she secretly married Sir Walter Raleigh, one of the Queen's glittering favourites. By 1592, the marriage and Bess's pregnancy could no longer be hidden. Elizabeth sent the couple to the Tower and expelled Bess from court. The Queen's fury joined political betrayal to sexual jealousy. Raleigh had cultivated an image of devotion to Elizabeth, and Bess had served inside the protected female household. Their secret union made both performances look false. Bess never recovered her former place beside the Queen. Imagine the discovery from within the chamber. A body that attendants helped lace, wash, and dress began to reveal pregnancy. Absences had to be explained, clothing altered. Whispers passed between women. The Queen, whose own body had been scrutinized for decades, turned that scrutiny upon a servant. The secret could not remain abstract. It took physical shape. In such moments, the female privy chamber became both sanctuary and trap. It offered women proximity to power, but denied them control over some of the most personal decisions of their lives. Lettice Knowles did not serve continuously in the same intimate role, but her story cut even deeper. She was a relative of Elizabeth through the Boleyn family and one of the most beautiful women at court. In 1578, she secretly married Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, the man Elizabeth had loved and relied upon for years. When the marriage became known, the Queen's rage was enduring. Lettice was excluded from court. Elizabeth reportedly used vicious language about her. The servants who had watched the Queen's long attachment to Dudley now watched its private wound become policy. They saw that the Virgin Queen's public renunciation of marriage did not mean the absence of longing, possessiveness, or grief. This contradiction is essential. Elizabeth's unmarried state created extraordinary political freedom. No husband became king beside her. No foreign prince took control of English patronage. No pregnancy interrupted government or risked her death in childbirth, the fate that had killed so many women, including her grandmother Elizabeth of York and her stepmother Catherine Parr. But freedom had a cost. The court demanded that she remain desirable enough to negotiate marriage while eternally postponing it, maternal enough to call herself mother of the nation while never bearing a child, feminine enough to satisfy convention, but masculine enough, in contemporary language, to command. Her attendants saw the strain where these impossible requirements met the physical woman. They saw her dance. Elizabeth loved dancing and retained the habit into later life. Dance displayed stamina, grace, command of rhythm, and control of the room. It also allowed flirtation within rules. The Queen's body, so guarded in bedchamber and council, became visible in motion. A servant prepared the shoes, adjusted the skirt, secured the jewels, and later removed clothing warmed by exertion. When foreign observers marvelled that the aging Queen still danced, her women knew the preparation and recovery hidden behind the spectacle. They saw her ride and walk. Elizabeth enjoyed physical activity, especially in her healthier years. At Hampton Court, she arranged for greater privacy in gardens, so she could walk without being observed from surrounding windows. The wish is revealing. A monarch watched almost every hour, sought spaces where the gaze could be controlled. Yet even a secret walk required security, knowledge of the route, and servants within call. Privacy at court was not absence of attendance. It was the careful narrowing of attendance. They saw her sleeplessness. Elizabeth declared herself no morning woman and could keep irregular hours, forcing counsellors and servants to wait. She might read late, listen to music, converse, or delay decisions. Her reluctance to move according to another person's timetable became part of royal authority, but every delayed bedtime extended someone else's labour. A lady remained dressed and alert. A groom kept fires safe. A messenger waited in a corridor. A kitchen held food ready. The Queen's freedom from schedule was purchased by the household's captivity to it. They saw her eat, though royal eating itself was divided between appetite and ceremony. At times, Elizabeth dined privately. At other times, food service became public ritual. Paul Hentzner described the elaborate preparation of the royal table, even when the Queen was not seated before it. A gentleman entered bearing a rod. Others followed with tablecloths. They knelt repeatedly before the empty place representing the monarch. Dishes were brought with reverence, tasted for poison, and carried onward. To a foreign observer, the ceremony seemed almost religious. The object of worship might not even be present. Majesty had separated from the mortal act of chewing. Behind that ritual lay the kitchens. Fires burned hot enough to redden faces. Spits turned, pots boiled. Meat, fish, bread, butter, eggs, spices, fruits, and sugar moved through specialized offices. Servants hauled wood and water, cleaned grease, plucked birds, gutted fish, skimmed stock, shaped pastry, and carried heavy dishes through passages before food cooled. Waste accumulated rapidly. Bones, ash, blood, spoiled scraps and dirty vessels had to go somewhere. A royal meal emerged from an industrial landscape of heat, smell, danger, and exhaustion. Elizabeth's table reflected the reach of her kingdom and its commerce. Imported spices and sugar announced wealth. Wine crossed seas. Seasonal fruits arrived from estates and markets. Fast days altered menus according to religious rules. Physicians offered dietary advice based on humoral theory, balancing foods imagined as hot, cold, moist, or dry. Illness might bring broths, possets, cordials, syrups, and preserves. A sweet medicine could soothe one complaint while worsening a tooth. Tasting food was not mere theatrical flourish. European courts feared poisoning, and Elizabeth's regime had real enemies. William Cecil worried about dangerous substances reaching the Queen through gloves, perfumes, garments, or gifts. Chamberers occupied a vulnerable point in the security chain because tailors, laundresses, wardrobers and suppliers approached their rooms. A beautifully scented glove could be luxury or imagined weapon. The Queen's attendants inspected, received, guarded and transmitted objects. Their domestic duties were part of counterintelligence. Fear of poison gave the body of the monarch a permanent political sensitivity. Sudden stomach pain might be spoiled food, ordinary illness, anxiety, or assassination. Physicians examined urine, pulse, complexion, appetite, sleep, and excretions according to the medicine of the day. Servants collected what physicians inspected. A royal stool or urine flask could become evidence about the health of the state. The humiliating intimacy was not spoken in proclamations, but governments waited upon its interpretation. The Tudor palace made it difficult to separate refined ceremony from basic human necessity. Hampton Court had sophisticated features for its age, including private garderobes in elite lodgings and a large communal toilet block known as the Great House of Easement for lower-ranking occupants. Yet the court could number hundreds. Chamber pots were common. Men urinated in corners despite efforts to discourage them. Privies discharged into drains or pits. Gong scourers and other low-status workers removed accumulated waste. Their labour protected the noses and health of people who preferred not to know their names. Elizabeth inherited palaces built and rebuilt by her father and grandfather: Whitehall, Greenwich, Hampton Court, Richmond, Windsor, and others. She also visited noble houses on royal progresses. Each residence had to absorb an approaching city of people, horses, baggage, furniture, documents, clothing, plate, and food. Tapestries were hung, beds assembled, kitchens supplied, rooms assigned according to rank, privies prepared. The Queen's close stool travelled with the portable world of monarchy. So did washing basins, linens, cushions and perfumes. Magnificence moved on carts. A royal progress allowed Elizabeth to show herself to subjects and to shift some of the enormous expense of court onto hosts. Towns built arches, delivered speeches, offered gifts, and staged pageants. Noble families spent ruinous sums to house and entertain her. From a distance, the procession looked like a golden river. Riders, banners, guards, ladies, wagons, and the Queen at the centre. From the servants' perspective, it was controlled chaos. They packed wardrobes, counted plate, protected jewels, found missing pins, cleaned unfamiliar rooms, located water, negotiated crowded sleeping arrangements, and tried to reproduce royal standards in houses never designed for them. The host's servants laboured beside the Queen's. Local bakers increased production. Brewers supplied drink. Farmers lost animals to the appetite of the household. Carters wore down roads. Temporary latrines and existing privies strained under numbers. Refuse grew. A beautiful visit could leave debt, damaged grounds, and an odour that lingered after the Queen's departure. Elizabeth's progresses brought ruler and people together, but they also revealed how royal spectacle consumed the labour and resources of those along its path. The Queen knew the value of such spectacle. She spoke to crowds, received petitions, praised entertainments, and allowed subjects to see the carefully constructed body of monarchy. This visibility helped compensate for limited government infrastructure. Her presence turned political loyalty into a physical experience. People remembered the colour of her clothing, the angle of her hand, the sound of her voice. Servants made those moments possible by ensuring that weather, dust, fatigue, and travel did not break the image before the audience saw it. Travel also exposed the Queen's body to discomfort. Roads jolted, horses tired, rain-soaked fabric, summer heat built beneath layers. Inns and borrowed rooms offered uncertain bedding. Fleas and lice were familiar threats across society. Fine combs, clean linen, airing, and careful housekeeping fought infestation. But wealth did not create an insect-proof world. Bedding was transported partly because royal sleep could not be entrusted entirely to whatever mattress a host possessed. Servants inspected chambers, laid textiles, and protected the Queen as much as 16th century knowledge allowed. To call this world filthy without context misses the constant work against filth. The palace was not indifferent to cleanliness. It was engaged in an endless losing battle against density, organic materials, open flame, animals, and inadequate drainage. Floors might be covered with rushes or matting, changed according to household practice. Sweet herbs added scent and could discourage some pests. Walls were hung with tapestries that warmed rooms but trapped dust and smoke. Chimneys improved comfort but did not eliminate soot. Windows admitted air but also cold and damp. Every solution created another task. Perfume belonged to hygiene, medicine, and politics. Rosewater washed hands and freshened rooms. Pomanders carried aromatic substances believed to protect against corrupt air. Herbs and spices were burned or boiled when chambers needed fumigation. Gloves could be perfumed. Hair and cloth could receive scented oils. Modern retellings sometimes describe perfume only as a desperate cover for people who never washed. In reality, scent worked alongside washing and clean linen, while also reflecting the medical belief that pleasant aromas could defend the body against disease. The nose was both sensory organ and imagined gatekeeper of health. Elizabeth lived through repeated epidemics. Plague visited London, forcing the court to avoid movements and avoid infected districts. Sweating sickness belonged more to earlier Tudor decades, but memories of sudden epidemic death remained. Smallpox struck the Queen herself in October 1562 at Hampton Court. At first, physicians reportedly hesitated to name the illness, knowing that diagnosis could alarm the government and anger the patient. When her condition worsened, the succession crisis became immediate. Elizabeth had no husband, no child, and no officially named heir. Counsellors argued while attendants confronted fever and bodily danger. The Queen believed she might die. She asked that Robert Dudley be appointed protector of the realm and made financial provisions for him, while insisting that nothing improper had occurred between them. The statement is poignant because even at the edge of death she managed reputation. In the sick room, privacy and politics collapsed. Physicians prescribed. Ladies wiped skin, changed linen, cooled or warmed the body, brought liquids and managed the waste of fever. Messages moved in and out. Every improvement or decline could affect factional calculations beyond the door. Elizabeth survived. Recovery transformed her into a ruler who had escaped a disease many subjects feared as a death sentence or disfiguring judgment. Later legend makes the illness the origin of a lifelong mask of lead makeup. The more careful conclusion is that smallpox intensified her awareness of bodily vulnerability and public appearance, whether or not it left the dramatic scars popular culture imagines. Her attendants had witnessed the unpainted crisis. They knew that Gloriana had sweated, weakened, and expected death. Illness stripped away distinctions only to rebuild them through service. A poor woman with smallpox might be isolated in a cramped room, cared for by relatives who risked infection and could not summon elite physicians. The Queen could move a court, command medicines, and receive constant attendance. Yet no title could negotiate with a virus. The body under the linen remained human. The difference lay in how many other bodies were placed around it to absorb the danger. Cat Ashley remained important after the accession, but her influence drew scrutiny. Her involvement in marriage schemes and court politics showed that a woman labelled servant could shape the realm. Elizabeth loved her, quarrelled with her, and at times distanced herself under pressure. Cat died in 1565. For the Queen, the loss removed one of the last living links to childhood. For Blanche Parry, it opened the way to greater responsibility as chief gentlewoman. A household changed not only through appointments, but through grief. Blanche's long service was remarkable because it survived the transformations of Elizabeth's identity. She had known the motherless child, the vulnerable princess, the imprisoned suspect, and the crowned monarch. As keeper of jewels and controller of access, she became an influential intermediary. Petitioners approached her. Welsh connections benefited from her position. Gifts flowed. It would be naive to imagine the Privy Chamber as a community of selfless companions untouched by patronage. Service created opportunity, and opportunity attracted requests. Blanche could be devoted to Elizabeth while also advancing people within her network. Her loyalty was expressed through constancy rather than romantic equality. She remained a servant in a rigid hierarchy. Elizabeth could give her clothes, money, or land, and such gifts could secure comfort in age. But dependence ran upward. Blanche's identity and fortune were inseparable from the Queen. When her eyesight failed, she could no longer perform every duty as before, yet she retained honour and a place in Elizabeth's memory. Her monument at Blackened presents a life defined by service, turning private attendance into public virtue. Today, a richly embroidered cloth at St. Faith's Church in Blackened has been linked to Elizabeth's wardrobe and to Blanche Parry. Though, like many objects associated with the Queen, its precise journey invites careful interpretation. What matters, beyond any single attribution, is that textiles survive where bodies do not. Stitches preserve the scale of labour. Silver and gold thread catch modern light. The hand that wore such fabric is gone. The hands that made, altered, guarded, and perhaps repurposed it are even harder to recover. The Queen's women also served as an informal intelligence network. They knew who waited outside, who had quarrelled, who brought a gift, who was ill, who was secretly courting whom, and which faction hoped for access. Male counsellors sometimes dismissed female political action as gossip because it moved through conversation rather than formal office. But gossip at court was information under pressure. A whispered warning could save a career. A bedroom confidence could affect diplomacy. The Queen herself used ambiguity expertly and expected attendants to understand when silence was service. This expectation made friendship unequal. Elizabeth might joke with her women, play cards, listen to reading, exchange gifts and show affection. She might mourn one deeply, yet no attendant could forget that the friend beside her was also sovereign. If the Queen asked a question, truth could be dangerous and lying fatal. If she criticised a dress, agreement might insult the wearer and disagreement might challenge royal taste. Survival required emotional precision. The problem sharpened as Elizabeth aged. Younger maids entered a household dominated by a queen old enough to be their grandmother. Their marriages, pregnancies and beauty confronted her with paths she had refused or lost. Hostile observers interpreted every flash of anger as envy. Admirers described principled concern for order. The truth changed from case to case and could include both. Elizabeth's emotional life cannot be reduced to a single motive. Her servants encountered not an abstract symbol, but a woman capable of contradictory feelings in the same hour. They learned her preferences. Which musician soothed her? Which sermon irritated her? Which joke could be risked? Which memory of Robert Dudley should not be touched? Which gown restored confidence after illness? Which petitioner had exhausted patience? Such knowledge rarely entered state papers because it lived in repetition. A good attendant anticipated rather than asked. She placed the correct object before desire became command. The smoother the service, the less visible the servant. Invisibility was not always possible. Maids of honour accompanied the Queen in public, carried her train, danced, sang, and decorated ceremonial space with youth and rank. Their beauty contributed to the court's appeal. They were watched by ambitious men and supervised because scandal near the Queen stained the Queen. Flirtation unfolded beneath surveillance. Letters passed through intermediaries. A servant who carried a message might not know its full meaning, yet could be punished if the exchange erupted into scandal. The court's erotic tension existed beside fierce religious conflict. Elizabeth's government established a Protestant settlement that required outward conformity while attempting, especially early in the reign, to avoid the most extreme demands on either side. The Queen disliked having windows made into men's souls, as a later phrase associated with her policy suggested, but enforcement hardened after Catholic plots, papal excommunication, rebellion, and international threat. Priests were hunted. Recusants were fined. Protestants pressed for further reform. In the chapel royal and the private closet, servants saw how the monarch's worship combined personal preference with state performance. Religion shaped the body. Fasting and feast days ordered diet. Kneeling, standing, prayer and communion displayed conformity. Illness prompted spiritual examination. Death demanded ritual. Elizabeth retained crucifixes and ceremonial elements that some radical Protestants distrusted, while rejecting papal authority and defending her supremacy. Her ladies came from families with varying beliefs. Some maintained Catholic sympathies. Proximity to the Queen did not erase conscience. It made conscience dangerous. The Northern Rebellion of 1569 and the papal bull excommunicating Elizabeth in 1570 intensified fear. After the bull, Catholic subjects could be imagined as released from obedience. Plots gathered around Mary, Queen of Scots, who had fled into England in 1568 and become both prisoner and alternative monarch. For nearly 19 years, Mary's existence haunted Elizabeth's court. Two queens occupied the political imagination, one ruling, one confined, one publicly unmarried, one a widow and mother, one Protestant, one Catholic. Servants guarded their rooms, carried their letters, dressed their bodies, and became instruments in a conflict larger than themselves. Mary's correspondence was watched and eventually trapped in the Babington plot. In 1587, after long hesitation, Elizabeth signed the death warrant. The execution at Fotheringay created a crisis of responsibility. Elizabeth later raged that the warrant had been dispatched without her final command, punishing Secretary William Davison. Historians still debate the balance between genuine horror, political evasion, and deliberate ambiguity. Her servants saw the immediate aftermath. Whatever strategy operated in council, the Queen's distress could be emotionally real. She had authorized the death of an anointed cousin and rival whose fate reflected what might once have happened to her. The chamber after such news was not cleanly separated from policy. A gown was fastened while Elizabeth discussed guilt. A meal cooled because she would not eat. Tears, fury, accusation and calculation occupied the same room. The women attending her had to respond without knowing which emotion would dominate next. They did not write cabinet minutes, but they witnessed government in its most bodily form, sleepless, grieving, and angry. 1 year later, the Spanish Armada approached. The national legend remembers ships, fireships, storms, and the Queen's speech at Tilbury. It should also remember preparation within the household. Fear of invasion penetrated palaces. Valuables required protection. Messages accelerated. Clothing for public appearances carried new significance. When Elizabeth rode among troops in August 1588 and declared that she had the body of a weak and feeble woman, but the heart and stomach of a king, she transformed the gendered criticism of her body into political strength. The phrase endured because it acknowledged what everyone saw and then overruled it. Before that appearance, servants dressed the supposedly weak body. They secured garments suitable for riding and spectacle. They prepared the Queen, who would convert vulnerability into courage before armed men. Afterward, they received her back into private space, where the symbolic king's heart returned to an aging woman's chest. The Armada's defeat enlarged Elizabeth's myth, but it also increased the burden of living up to it. Victory did not end danger. The war with Spain continued for years, draining money and lives. English expeditions failed as well as succeeded. Sailors returned sick or did not return at all. Taxes rose. Harvest failures in the 1590s brought hunger and unrest. Ireland consumed soldiers and treasure. At court, however, the Queen still had to appear as the source of abundance. Gold cloth could not admit an empty granary. A pearl-covered bodice could not reveal unpaid veterans. The contrast between national hardship and royal magnificence became sharper, and servants lived on the line between them. They saw leftover food, discarded fabric, and gifts worth more than labourers might earn in a lifetime. They also saw the Crown's chronic shortage of ready money, and the Queen's habit of rewarding service with access, offices, leases, or promises, rather than simple cash. Elizabeth was often praised for frugality compared with her father. She reused and altered garments, Valuable fabric was too expensive to treat as disposable. Clothes could be remade, sleeves transferred, embroidery changed, jewels removed, and old pieces given to attendants. A royal gift of worn clothing was not an insult. It transferred valuable material and the prestige of bodily proximity. A gentlewoman might receive a gown that had once enclosed the Queen herself. The object could be altered to fit another body, sold, passed within a family, or repurposed for religious use. Majesty circulated through second-hand cloth. This practice reveals another side of the private chamber. The Queen did not simply consume service, she distributed favour through objects handled by servants. Clothing became currency. A recipient could display royal intimacy without saying a word. Yet such generosity also reinforced dependence. The gift reminded everyone that status flowed from Elizabeth's body outward. Even what she had finished wearing could transform another household. Blanche Parry died in 1590. Robert Dudley had died 2 years earlier, only months after the Armada crisis. Francis Walsingham, the Queen's principal secretary and spy master, also died in 1590. One by one, the people who had shaped the early and middle reign disappeared. Elizabeth continued, but continuity began to feel like abandonment. Younger courtiers saw offices ahead of them. The Queen saw familiar faces vanish. Her grief could become attached to objects. The last letter Dudley sent her, written shortly before his death, was reportedly kept and marked as his final letter. Whether Elizabeth unfolded it often cannot be known, but its preservation speaks to private memory surviving inside political archives. Servants knew which papers must not be discarded. A chamber that seemed cluttered with letters, gifts, gloves, books, and jewels could contain emotional relics legible only to those who knew the story. Mary Radcliffe, one of the long-serving women of the Privy Chamber, inherited important responsibilities for jewels after Blanche. She never married. Her decades beside Elizabeth resembled the Queen's own continuity in miniature. Service became a life, rather than a temporary stage before marriage. Women like Mary complicate the assumption that every attendant was desperate to escape into a household of her own. Court offered income, community, status, and influence. It also demanded the sacrifice of independent time and subjected a woman to the Queen's changing moods. Long service could be honour and enclosure at once. Dorothy Stafford, another experienced gentlewoman, had lived through religious exile under Mary I and returned after Elizabeth's accession. She served for decades and used her position to help relatives. Catherine Carey, Lady Knollys, a close kinswoman of the Queen through Anne Boleyn's family, occupied the intimate circle until her death in 1569. Catherine's daughter Lettice would later wound Elizabeth through marriage to Dudley. Families did not enter the chamber as isolated individuals. Their histories accumulated. A young woman might be judged through affection for her mother, suspicion of her husband, or resentment toward her sister. This family web helps explain why access was so fiercely guarded. The Queen's bedchamber was one of the few places where women held institutional influence unavailable to them in Parliament, the Episcopate, or the Privy Council. They could not openly decide policy as councillors did, but they could shape who reached the person who did. Their power was informal, dependent, and often denied after the fact. Male writers preferred to describe them as meddling women or invisible attendants. The records of petitions, gifts, appointments, and correspondence tell a different story. Yet the women who come into focus are mainly gentlewomen and ladies, already privileged compared with the mass of female labour sustaining court. Below them stood laundresses, seamstresses, starchers, kitchen workers, nurses, and temporary workers whose names appear only when paid, accused, or buried. Below them were the wives and daughters of suppliers, the women who spun thread, raised poultry, brewed ale, cleaned lodgings, and absorbed the court's demand. To tell Elizabeth's private life only through titled companions would reproduce the palace's own hierarchy of visibility. Consider the royal bed. It was not merely furniture, A great bed involved timber, cords, mattress, featherbeds, bolsters, sheets, blankets, quilts, curtains, valances, and embroidered hangings. It created a room within a room, conserving heat and signalling status. On progress, components might travel and be assembled by specialized servants. Sheets required laundering, feathers needed care, fleas could hide in seams. Bed curtains trapped warmth, breath, smoke, and scent. A lady near the bed might share confidential conversation. A lower servant later handled the linen without sharing the confidence. Sleeping arrangements reflected rank and security. Elite people commonly shared beds with relatives, companions, or trusted attendants. Solitary sleep was not automatically the ideal it is for many people today. Elizabeth could have a woman close by as a bedfellow or attendant, ready if she woke ill or alarmed. That intimacy did not prove a secret romance, despite centuries of speculation about everyone near her. It reflected the social and practical structure of early modern life. The Queen's night was guarded because sleep made even a monarch defenceless. Night transformed the palace. Public rooms emptied, but work continued. Watchmen moved through gates and courtyards. Candles burned at risk of fire. A sick servant coughed behind a partition. Rats searched for food. The Thames carried barges and refuse beyond dark windows. Somewhere, a chamber pot waited to be emptied. Somewhere, a messenger arrived with news that could not wait until morning. In the bedchamber, a trusted woman listened for a change in the Queen's breathing. Elizabeth suffered episodes of illness across her reign. Fevers, tooth pain, digestive complaints, and periods of melancholy or exhaustion are reported, though retrospective diagnosis is dangerous. Physicians worked within humoral medicine. They might recommend diet, rest, bleeding, purging, sweating, cordial waters, herbal preparations, or other treatments. Some remedies offered comfort, others could weaken a patient. The Queen did not always obey. Her resistance to medical control formed part of a wider resistance to being commanded. The refusal mattered because physicians were men permitted unusual access to the female sovereign's body. Their examinations had to be negotiated through modesty, rank, and political urgency. Ladies mediated. They could report symptoms the Queen would not describe directly. They could administer remedies after physicians withdrew. They watched reactions and decided when to call for help. The history of royal medicine is therefore also the history of female bedside labour. Pain could make Elizabeth impatient. Toothache, fever, fatigue, and grief do not explain every outburst, but they belong in the room. The marble calm of portraiture encourages us to imagine political anger as pure strategy. Servants knew when strategy came with a sleepless night, a swollen face, or an untouched meal. They also knew that a ruler in pain remained capable of harming others. Humanizing power does not absolve it. One of the most revealing figures in the Queen's extended household was her godson, John Harrington. Clever, irreverent, and repeatedly in trouble, Harrington translated a scandalous section of Ariosto and circulated it among court women. Elizabeth punished him by ordering him to complete the entire translation, a command that turned discipline into literary achievement. He later wrote a satirical work describing an improved Flushing privy, the device for which he is popularly remembered. The text was called A Discourse on a Stale Subject, and wrapped sanitation in political and literary jokes. Harrington's toilet did not produce a modern sanitary revolution. It required water and careful construction, and the problem of sewage disposal remained. But its existence destroys the idea that people accepted stench without thought. They recognized foul privies as a problem. Harrington described how gases and odours might be managed. His satire also shows that excrement was a language of politics. Court corruption, bodily waste, and verbal filth could be folded into one dangerous joke. Elizabeth reportedly saw or received a version of Harrington's device, though later retellings decorate the story. What matters is the closeness of invention and intimacy. The Queen's godson could joke about toilets because everyone at court knew the reality hidden behind euphemism. A chamber might be called a house of easement. A bowel movement could be described in ceremonious language. Velvet covered the seat. Beneath the words and fabric lay the same waste produced in every cottage. Sanitation also connected palace to city. London grew rapidly during Elizabeth's reign, attracting migrants, merchants, artisans, servants, actors, refugees, and the poor. Streets carried refuse. The Thames served as highway, water source, and recipient of waste. Regulations attempted to control dumping, but enforcement struggled against volume. Wealthy households removed filth from immediate rooms only by moving it into yards, pits, carts, streams, or poorer neighbourhoods. Cleanliness for one body often meant dangerous labour for another. The royal court floated above this system without escaping it. Palaces near the Thames benefited from transport and drainage, but shared the river's odours and contamination. When Elizabeth moved between Greenwich, Whitehall, Richmond, and Hampton Court, barges offered speed and ceremonial visibility. Music might play on the water. Crowds could watch. At the landing, servants handled baggage while the river carried the hidden output of the city. Food waste followed a similar path down the hierarchy. The royal household had formal systems of allowances and leftovers. Uneaten food could feed servants according to rank, be distributed, sold, or misappropriated. Scraps became perquisites. Bones had value. Dripping could be reused. In a society where hunger was real, what left the Queen's table might sustain several other people. The contrast makes the ceremonial abundance both impressive and disturbing. A dish carried away untouched was not simply waste until the household decided who was entitled to it. Servants themselves ate according to status. Senior officers had tables and allowances. Lower workers took meals where and when they could. At crowded palaces, some slept near their work, especially around kitchens and service spaces. Heat that made a kitchen exhausting by day could make it desirable on a cold night. Privacy was scarce. The royal person occupied nested rooms guarded from intrusion. The people sustaining that privacy lived in collective exposure. Clothing marked this hierarchy instantly. Elizabeth's maids of honour might receive coordinated gowns for a ceremonial event. Chamberers could receive valuable cast-offs. Kitchen labourers wore practical wool and linen. Livery identified household service. Dirt on a servant's cuff did not indicate moral failure. It recorded work that kept someone else's cuff white. The clean queen and the dirty labourer were not opposites. They were parts of the same process. The process extended beyond England. Silk, dyes, pearls, precious stones, spices, sugar, and fine linen moved through international trade. Some goods were entangled with violence, colonisation, and enslavement. Elizabeth granted charters and invested in ventures that helped lay foundations for later English imperial expansion. John Hawkins's slaving voyages in the 1560s carried kidnapped Africans across the Atlantic. The Queen's relationship to these ventures included support and profit, as well as political calculation. The jewels and sugar of court cannot be separated from the developing systems that extracted wealth from distant bodies. This does not mean that a particular spoonful of sugar in Elizabeth's mouth can always be traced to a named plantation or captive worker. Historical supply chains are often incomplete, but the broad connection is real. Luxury at Greenwich depended upon ships, merchants, credit, sailors, coerced labour, and armed power. The private body of the Queen consumed the expanding world. The blackening of elite teeth from sugar is therefore more than a grotesque personal detail. It is a physical mark of global appetite. Foreign visitors studied that body as evidence about England. Ambassadors described Elizabeth's appearance, health, clothes, speech, and moods, because their governments needed to know whether she might marry, bear an heir, die soon, or change policy. A wrinkle could enter a diplomatic dispatch. Missing teeth could affect an audience. A dance might be reported as proof of vigour. The women who dressed her prepared not only a queen, but an international signal. André Hurault de Metz, a French ambassador who met Elizabeth in the late 1590s, described an ageing woman whose appearance no longer matched youthful portrait ideals. Reports emphasised wrinkles, false hair, dental loss, and exposed skin. Such observers carried their own prejudices and political purposes. An old male king could be praised for experience, while an old female ruler was measured mercilessly against beauty. Still, the descriptions confirm what servants already knew. Time had entered the chamber, no matter how firmly official portraiture kept it outside. Elizabeth responded by increasing control over her image. Portrait patterns repeated an approved face. Artists and patrons worked within expectations. Symbols grew more elaborate as naturalism receded. In the Armada portrait, her hand rests near a globe, while scenes of Spanish ships show danger overcome. In the Rainbow portrait, produced near the end of the reign, eyes and ears cover her garment, a serpent of wisdom appears, and a rainbow rests in her hand. The face is not the face of a woman nearing 70. It is the face of rule detached from ordinary age. The royal collection notes that Elizabeth carefully controlled her image and that portraits gave her goddess-like qualities. That control was not vanity alone. Political enemies portrayed her as illegitimate, heretical, sexually corrupt, barren, and decaying. The unaging image answered those attacks, yet it required a widening gap between representation and daily sight. Servants lived inside that gap. Later stories claim that Elizabeth forbade realistic portraits or ordered unflattering images destroyed. Some regulation of her likeness occurred, but the legend of total control has grown beyond clear evidence. Another story, repeated from Ben Jonson, says she refused true mirrors in old age and that mischievous ladies painted vermilion on her nose because she could not see the result. This anecdote was written years after her death and may tell us more about Jacobean mockery of an aging female ruler than about an actual mourning in the chamber. It should be treated as hostile gossip, not surveillance footage. But the story survived because it expressed a believable tension. A woman whose authority depended partly on visual magnificence faced a mirror that no longer cooperated. Her attendants had to balance honesty with protection. If she asked whether she looked well, what answer was safe? If she chose a youthful style, who could suggest restraint? Service required maintaining the Queen's confidence without making her ridiculous before others. That task grew harder as enemies and younger courtiers watched for weakness. The late court developed a reputation for frustration. Older councillors defended cautious policies. Younger aristocrats sought war, glory, monopolies, and rapid advancement. Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex and stepson of Lettice Knowles, became the most dramatic favourite of Elizabeth's final decade. Handsome, ambitious, and emotionally volatile, Essex cultivated the Queen while resisting her authority. Their quarrels became public theatre. He turned his back on her during a council dispute. Elizabeth reportedly struck him or boxed his ear. He reached toward his sword before another courtier intervened. The aging Queen and the proud young Earl acted out a struggle between personal favour and sovereign obedience. The women around Elizabeth saw how Essex manipulated access. Gifts, letters, apologies, strategic illness, and appearances at court formed a campaign for intimacy. His circle appealed to people near the Queen. The chamber became contested ground. When Essex went to Ireland in 1599 with a large army, expectations were enormous. His campaign failed to defeat Hugh O'Neill decisively. He made an unauthorised truce and returned to England without permission. Essex reached the palace early and pushed through private spaces to surprise Elizabeth before she was formally prepared. Contemporary accounts say he found her in a state of undress, her hair about her face. The moment is one of the most revealing violations of the reign. For decades, access to the natural body had been controlled by women and ritual. Essex used familiarity and urgency to break through the boundary. He expected the emotional favourite to reach the woman before councillors reached the Queen. At first, she received him with some warmth. Later, once dressed and surrounded by authority, she interrogated his conduct. The transformation from unprepared woman to sovereign was rapid, but the breach could not be forgotten. Servants in the chamber had witnessed the intrusion. They saw how much power lay in the time before the public face was assembled. Essex was confined, lost offices, and watched his fortunes collapse. In February 1601, he led a desperate rising in London, hoping to seize access to the Queen and remove enemies from her council. The city did not join him. He surrendered, was tried for treason, and executed. Elizabeth had signed the warrant against a man she had loved, indulged, and feared. The event repeated the emotional structure of Mary, Queen of Scots. Intimacy turned into threat, hesitation ended in death, and responsibility became entangled with grief. Popular legend later claimed that Essex possessed a ring Elizabeth had given him as a pledge that would guarantee mercy if returned, and that the Countess of Nottingham withheld it until confessing on her deathbed. The Queen then supposedly cursed the Countess and died of grief. The story is powerful and probably apocryphal. It appears in later traditions rather than secure contemporary proof. Yet the ring legend reveals the public's desire to explain politics through the chamber. A tiny object carried by a servant becomes the hinge between love and execution. The state becomes a missed, private message. The real story needs no invented ring. After Essex's death, Elizabeth's court changed. She continued to govern, but losses accumulated. War, debt, faction, inflation, and bad harvests shadowed triumphal memory. The Queen's own body offered fewer reassurances. Teeth were missing, sleep could be irregular, appetite changed, friends died. Servants who had known earlier decades were gone or aging themselves. Younger faces watched the throne as if it were a door about to open. In 1601, Elizabeth addressed Parliament in what became known as the Golden Speech. She spoke of love for her subjects and declared that their affection was the jewel she valued above treasure. The words were politically skilled, responding to anger over monopolies. They were also a final act of mutual recognition between Queen and political nation. The jewelled body claimed that love, not jewels, mattered most. Servants who fastened her ornaments knew how much work the metaphor concealed. Monopolies demonstrate the distance between chamber favour and ordinary life. The Crown granted individuals exclusive rights over commodities, allowing favoured patentees to profit while prices rose. Court connections mattered. Public resentment became intense. Elizabeth cancelled some abuses and allowed reform, preserving popularity. But the system showed how access could turn private favour into widespread economic pain. A word spoken near the Queen might become a patent affecting households she would never enter. The same court that produced Shakespeare's plays, daring voyages, music, poetry, and dazzling portraiture also produced informers, torture warrants, military levies, hunger, and exclusion. Elizabeth's reign cannot be reduced to a golden age or a chamber of horrors. Its achievements and cruelties shared institutions. The private household mirrored this complexity. Affection and surveillance, refinement and waste, female influence and female confinement, careful washing and unavoidable odour all coexisted. For the ordinary Londoner, the Queen appeared on rare ceremonial occasions, coins, proclamations, and stories. For her servants, she appeared before the fastening of the final sleeve. That sight did not automatically make them disillusioned. Familiarity could deepen reverence. A woman who had seen Elizabeth feverish might consider her survival providential. A servant who emptied waste might still kneel before the royal presence. Early modern people did not require sacred figures to be free of bodily functions. The shocking contradiction is more modern than Tudor. We confuse power with physical perfection, then delight in exposing the body as revenge. If we could follow one ordinary day through the private household, the revelation would not arrive as a single scandalous confession. It would gather through the senses. Before dawn in winter, darkness pressed against palace glass. The air inside the royal lodging was warmer than the courtyards, but never uniformly warm. A fire heated one section of a chamber, while cold survived near doors, windows, and stone. Ash from the previous night had to be cleared or revived. Fuel arrived through chains of labour stretching back to woodland and cart. The Queen's warmth began with somebody else's cold hands. A woman entered quietly. Others waited in adjoining rooms. The bed curtains held a pocket of breath and heat. Elizabeth might already be awake, or she might keep everyone suspended because she had slept badly. No bell transformed the household automatically. A voice, a movement, or the judgment of a trusted attendant began the sequence. The close stool or chamber vessel, if used, required discreet attention. The work was intimate, but its success was measured by disappearance. No visitor should smell the night's waste or see the person carrying it away. Water followed. Not the endless pressurized stream of a modern bathroom, but water drawn, carried, heated, poured, used and removed. Elizabeth could wash hands, face and body with cloths and basins and could bathe more fully when she chose. The exact frequency varied and is not preserved as a modern hygiene log. What survives, washing equipment, laundry systems, scented waters and Tudor concern for clean linen, makes the old claim of a monarch proud never to wash implausible. Yet every clean surface depended upon repeated lifting. One royal washing might require several journeys by servants who themselves had less privacy, less hot water, and less time. The Queen's mouth needed attention. A toothcloth, pick, powder, rinse, or aromatic substance could be offered. Earlier in life, these acts may have felt preventative and refined. Later, blackened or missing teeth made them management of irreversible damage. If infection caused swelling, chewing on one side could become habit. If breath smelled, perfume and sweetened preparations could only compete with it. An attendant close enough to arrange a collar could not escape the result. She also could not recoil. Control of the face belonged to service as much as control of the hands. Hair came next, though the order of tasks could shift. Elizabeth's natural hair had been celebrated when she was young. As she aged, wigs, false hair, pads, wires, ornaments, and veils helped maintain the familiar red-gold identity. False hair was not itself a shameful secret. Elite fashion used additions and structures openly enough. The private truth lay in the difference between the object on its stand and the effect once assembled. Servants saw the transformation in reverse each night. They removed the crown without calling it a crown. Cosmetics, where used, required preparation and judgment. Recipes circulated for waters, oils, pigments, skin treatments and hair colour. Some ingredients now recognized as harmful existed within this world. Others were ordinary plant products, waxes, fats, vinegars, minerals, or distilled waters. The modern viewer wants a single poison jar labelled Venetian ceruse. The chamber more likely contained a changing assortment of preparations, whose exact contents and use are not fully documented. The attendant's knowledge was practical rather than chemical. This soothed redness, that dried the skin. This colour held under candlelight, that scent pleased the Queen. Long-term toxicity, if present, could remain invisible as cause. The famous pale face emerged through more than makeup. Indoor light, white linen, blackwork embroidery, jewels and contrast with dark fabric shaped perception. Portrait painters idealized, courtiers praised. Political ritual instructed the viewer to see radiance. A servant could know that a spot had been concealed without concluding that the entire face was a toxic shell. This distinction matters because misogynistic history has often turned an aging woman's grooming into moral corruption, while treating male armour, padding, wigs, portraits and bodily concealment as ordinary power. Once linen touched skin, dressing became collaborative engineering. Elizabeth did not step into a complete gown hanging from a modern wardrobe. Pieces were layered, tied, pinned, hooked, laced and adjusted. Weight accumulated. Sleeves might be separate. A decorated forepart displayed expensive fabric where the gown opened. Ruffs required support. Jewels could be stitched or pinned into place. The garments redistributed the Queen's proportions and controlled posture. An attendant had to pull firmly without seeming rough, move closely without violating respect, and respond instantly if Elizabeth disliked the result. Clothing could also become argument. The Queen might reject one gown and demand another. That choice triggered more labour. Pieces returned, new ones fetched, jewels reconsidered, hair ornaments adjusted. Councillors waited. Ambassadors waited. The Queen's delay could be strategic, asserting that others entered her time rather than she theirs. It could also be indecision, discomfort, or mood. Servants absorbed all explanations into action. Breakfast was not fixed to a modern expectation. The Queen might take a small meal in private or delay food. Bread, ale, wine, meat, eggs, preserves or other items could be available according to preference and season. Diet changed with health and religious observance. Food reached the Privy Chamber after procurement, storage, preparation, tasting and transport. By the time Elizabeth touched a cup, dozens of people might have contributed to its contents and safety. Then came papers and people. Secretaries brought matters of state, councillors requested decisions, foreign ambassadors sought audiences, petitioners hoped for favour. Musicians, scholars, clergy and courtiers waited for notice. Women of the chamber controlled the transition from bodily preparation to government. A door opened. A name was admitted. The person entering saw the finished queen and responded with bows, kneeling, and carefully chosen words. The servants remained at the edge of vision, present enough to act, invisible enough not to interrupt. Throughout the day, bodily need did not stop because government began. Elizabeth required drink, food, rest, and relief. Formal clothing made simple acts more complicated. A private withdrawal might pause business. Ladies managed fabric around the close stool and guarded modesty. The pot was removed. Hands were washed. Scent could be renewed. Then policy resumed. An order affecting thousands might be signed minutes after a servant carried away royal urine. That is not a cheap joke. It is the physical truth of government. The same closeness exposed menstruation during Elizabeth's fertile years and the transition into menopause later. Again, the archive does not justify invented schedules or lurid claims, but linen had to be changed, discomfort managed, and blood removed. In a culture that linked the Queen's fertility to national survival, attendants were positioned near information coveted by ambassadors. Silence was security. A servant's knowledge of stained linen could be politically explosive, even when nothing abnormal had occurred. Male diplomats tried to penetrate this female wall through bribery, friendship, rumour, and medical speculation. They asked whether Elizabeth still menstruated, whether she could bear children, whether a marriage negotiation was sincere, whether a favourite visited too privately, whether illness signalled pregnancy. Most reports mixed observation with wishful thinking. The absence of reliable proof did not stop circulation. Servants became imagined sources even when they had said nothing. At midday or evening, ceremonial dining could surround private appetite. Elizabeth sometimes ate alone or with chosen companions, but the service outside remained hierarchical. Plates, knives, napkins and vessels announced rank. Forks were not yet the universal table tool they later became in England. Hands mattered, making washing before and after dining important. Meat was carved. Sauces concealed or enhanced flavour. Bones and scraps moved down the household economy. Dental damage changed what an aging queen could comfortably eat. Hard foods became difficult. Soft preparations, minced meat, broths and sweet foods might be easier, although specific menus cannot always be linked directly to her teeth. Loss of teeth also altered the shape of the face. Portraiture could preserve full lips and a smooth jaw. Attendants saw the structural changes. Speech could blur. When an ambassador struggled to understand her, women accustomed to her voice might interpret without embarrassment. The day could include music and reading. Elizabeth played instruments, enjoyed dancing, and valued learned conversation. She translated, wrote, and spoke several languages. The private chamber was therefore not only a toilet and dressing room, it was an intellectual and cultural space. Reducing it to filth would be as false as ignoring the chamber pot. A woman could discuss theology in Latin, listen to a virginal, and then suffer tooth pain. The coexistence is the point. Cards and games offered leisure, but also revealed temper. Money or tokens changed hands. Jokes tested boundaries. The Queen might tease an attendant, praise a performance, or erupt at perceived disrespect. Those who knew her longest recognized warning signs: a shift in voice, a sharp question, a stillness before accusation. Newer maids learned by watching seniors. Emotional survival was part of training no household ordinance could fully describe. When public business ended, undressing reversed to morning's manufacture. Jewels were counted, pins removed, fabric examined for damage, stains, or missing ornaments. Valuable pieces returned to secure keeping. The ruff relaxed into linen, hair structures came away. The Queen's height and silhouette changed. A face that had represented empire became a tired face near candlelight. This was the hour when trusted attendants might hear what no counsellor did. Elizabeth could speak tenderly. She remembered service and rewarded constancy. She enjoyed wit and could laugh at boldness when it did not threaten authority. Her enduring attachment to women such as Blanche Parry, Kat Ashley, Mary Radcliffe, and others was not merely functional. These relationships carried affection, memory, and dependence. The Queen who resisted marriage still built a household of intimate bonds, but because she was Queen, she could define the terms and punish departures. The bedchamber preserved fear as well as friendship. Childhood memories of Thomas Seymour entering her room, the Tower, assassination plots, and the constant possibility of poison made unguarded sleep difficult in political imagination, even if she did not spend every night consciously terrified. Doors, locks, guards, and trusted bodies created protection. A servant sleeping nearby was part companion, part alarm system, part witness. Fire posed another danger. Palaces had burned before. Richmond itself had risen from rebuilding after a late 15th century fire. Candles and hearths filled rooms containing wood, textiles, straw, and tapestries. Someone had to watch flames, snuff lights, and respond to smoke. The Queen's magnificent bed hangings could become fuel. Safety depended upon servants remaining alert after others slept. Summer brought different discomfort. Heat gathered under formal clothing. Flies came toward food and waste. Windows opened to noise and river air. Progresses crowded unfamiliar houses. Scented waters refreshed skin, but no mechanical cooling existed. Elizabeth's stamina in ceremonies was therefore real. So was the labour of women who kept her appearance intact as sweat threatened linen, starch and cosmetics. Winter demanded fuel and clothing. Fur-lined gowns. Drafts crept through palace rooms. The Queen could move toward fire, but smoke and uneven heat irritated eyes and lungs. Servants carried wood and coal, swept ash, and endured service passages colder than decorated chambers. The warmth visible in a painted interior was local, expensive, and labour-intensive. Illness intensified every task. Vomit, diarrhoea, infected discharge, pus, blood, and sweat belonged to human sickness in the 16th century, as they do now. No surviving source proves that Elizabeth experienced every one of these in a dramatic form, and a responsible narrative must not invent them. But attendants at any long court career encountered some bodily fluids. Smallpox alone demanded close care. Fevers and dental disease added others. The private truth was not one uniquely revolting queen. It was the unavoidable material of nursing before gloves, antibiotics, germ theory, or modern sanitation. Why, then, did stories about Elizabeth's disgusting body become so persistent? Partly because her political image was so unnaturally polished. The smoother the painted face, the more satisfying the imagined crack. Partly because powerful old women have often been described through disgust. Male opponents attacked Elizabeth's sex, age, fertility, and appearance because they struggled to explain female sovereignty. Later dramatists and filmmakers inherited those images. The body became punishment for ambition. The beautiful princess turned into the painted crone. There is also a democratic pleasure in remembering that rulers use toilets. It punctures ceremonial distance. The close stool beneath velvet exposes equality at the level of digestion. Yet that pleasure can become cruel when it singles out the female body as uniquely deceptive. Henry VIII's enormous, diseased later body attracts horror too, but his physical decline is often linked to injury and tyranny. Elizabeth's is linked to cosmetics, vanity, and sexual failure. The difference reveals the gendered shape of historical disgust. Her servants did not publish a united exposé declaring that Elizabeth was filthy. Most left no memoir. The phrase that they revealed her private truth is a modern way of gathering scattered evidence: household accounts, wardrobe inventories, gifts, letters, ambassadorial reports, eyewitness descriptions, later recollections, monuments, and the architecture of service. Some sources came from people who loved her, some from people who feared her, some from enemies. Some were written decades later. The historian's task is not to force them into a single confession, but to compare what each could actually know. Paul Hentzner saw her at a distance in ceremony and described black teeth. Robert Carey witnessed the last illness and recorded cushions, refusal of food, and refusal of bed. Elizabeth Southwell supplied a darker account of the final days and aftermath, though coloured by superstition and retrospective storytelling. John Harrington captured the volatility of her favour and the earthy humour of court. Wardrobe workers recorded fabric, jewels, repairs, and loss. The women of the Privy Chamber appear through appointments, gifts, petitions, punishments, and family papers. None gives us the whole woman. Together, they make the portrait breathe. Breathing is precisely what official images omit. A portrait has no odour. It never coughs, swallows, or struggles to hear. Its teeth do not ache. Its ruff never wilts. Its jewels never pull against cloth. Paint preserves a political instant while attendants manage the hours before and after it. The most important revelation of service is duration. Majesty had to be rebuilt every day. That rebuilding could be harsh. Tailors and embroiderers strained eyes in weak light. Laundresses damaged skin in water and cleaning agents. Kitchen workers suffered burns and cuts. Carriers injured backs. Gong workers entered spaces filled with dangerous waste. Maids surrendered sleep. Gentlewomen endured insults they could not answer. The Queen's beauty was not fake because others made it. All public power is made by others. But the unequal distribution of discomfort was real. Elizabeth herself was not free from the system. She benefited most from it and commanded it, yet it also enclosed her. Every meal was watched. Every illness became rumour. Every wrinkle carried diplomatic meaning. Marriage could subordinate her crown. Pregnancy could kill her. Aging threatened the political image she had built. The servants who protected her privacy also proved that she had almost none. This is why the word disgusting must finally turn away from a single mouth or chamber pot and toward the structure around them. Decayed teeth are sad, painful, and perhaps unpleasant to smell, but not a moral crime. Bodily waste is universal. More disturbing is a culture that made dozens of people disappear so that one person could appear effortless, then preserved the jewels more carefully than the names of the hands that cleaned them. Even so, we should not flatten the servants into victims without agency. A court position could elevate a family. Women used access strategically. They exchanged news, sought favours, protected relatives, and formed alliances. A garment gifted by the Queen could become capital. A petition delivered at the right moment could secure a living. Long service brought pensions, property, or prestige. The chamber was a workplace in which exploitation and opportunity coexisted. For some, devotion was genuine. Blanche Parry's monument does not read like the revenge of a woman eager to expose her mistress. It presents service as the purpose of a life. Modern suspicion may find such loyalty difficult, but hierarchy could be emotionally meaningful to those within it. Elizabeth embodied religious survival, national independence, and personal memory. To wash her hands could feel like participation in history. For others, fear likely outweighed affection. A maid who watched Mary Scudamore's punishment or Bess Throckmorton's disgrace learned that the Queen could invade her future. A woman with a secret courtship knew that colleagues might become informants. The intimacy of shared rooms intensified surveillance. No written rule could guarantee that today's confidant would not protect herself tomorrow by speaking. The Queen understood this because she had grown up under the same pressure. Kat Ashley's interrogation after the Seymour scandal had shown how servants' testimony could endanger a princess. During Mary's reign, household loyalties were tested by prison and suspicion. Elizabeth entered queenship already skilled at compartmentalizing information. She trusted deeply, but never without awareness that trust could fail. As the 17th century approached, that lifelong vigilance became exhausting. The young woman who had once turned caution into survival was now surrounded by men preparing for the succession she refused to name publicly. Robert Cecil maintained secret communication with James VI of Scotland, Mary Stuart's son, and the likeliest heir. Other courtiers made their own approaches. Servants saw strangers treated with new interest, and old allies calculate the future. The Queen remained alive, but the household had begun to lean toward the next reign. In the autumn of 1602, loss closed around Elizabeth. Friends and relatives who connected her to earlier decades died. Her health, long resilient, seemed less secure. Reports speak of melancholy, a word that carried medical, emotional, and spiritual meanings. It could describe sadness, depression, withdrawal, or an imbalance of humours. We cannot interview the dying Queen, or apply a modern diagnosis with confidence, but witnesses agreed that her mood darkened. The woman famous for movement, sharp conversation, and command began to sit for long periods. One of the heaviest blows was the death of Catherine Carey, Countess of Nottingham, in February 1603. Catherine was connected to Elizabeth through the Boleyn family and had served close to her for decades. Later legend tied her death to the story of Essex's ring, making her confess that she had withheld his plea for mercy. No secure contemporary evidence supports the dramatic confession. The simpler truth is powerful enough. Elizabeth was losing another woman who belonged to the intimate history of her reign. The chamber was becoming a room of ghosts. At Whitehall, according to Elizabeth Southwell's later account, the Queen described or experienced a terrifying vision of her own body, thin and surrounded by firelight. The story belongs to a narrative filled with omens and should not be read as clinical fact. Yet it captures the atmosphere around a ruler whose death would transform the kingdom. In a world that saw providence in unusual weather, dreams, marks, and apparitions, servants watched for signs. Fear gave ordinary objects a supernatural charge. Elizabeth moved to Richmond Palace, a residence she knew well. The palace stood south of the Thames, away from the density of central London, in air contemporaries considered healthier. Gardens and water had once offered pleasure there. Now the royal apartments became the setting for decline. The same architecture that had staged entertainment narrowed into guarded rooms. The Queen, who had travelled through a kingdom, remained inside. Accounts of the illness differ. She may have suffered fever, throat swelling, a respiratory infection, dental infection, pneumonia, or some combination of conditions. Cancer and poisoning have also been proposed. No diagnosis can be proved. The famous theory that lead cosmetics killed her rests on uncertain premises about her cosmetic use and symptoms. Elizabeth did not permit the kind of examination that could settle modern curiosity, and even an early 17th century post-mortem would not have produced a modern medical answer. What witnesses could see was a change in behaviour. Elizabeth ate very little. She resisted physicians and attendants. She remained standing or sitting for extraordinary periods. The reasons are unknowable. Some later writers said she feared that if she lay down, she would never rise. Perhaps she associated bed with surrender, illness, or death. Perhaps breathing or swallowing felt worse when horizontal. Perhaps her refusal was the last expression of a personality that rejected commands. Every possibility returns us to the same scene. Servants held cushions while the Queen refused the furniture designed for her rest. Robert Carey arrived at court hoping for favour and watching the succession. His memoir provides one of the clearest descriptions. On a Sunday, the Queen did not go to chapel. Cushions were laid in the privy chamber near the door of her closet so that she could hear the service. From then, Carey wrote, she became worse. She remained on cushions for at least 4 days and nights. Those around her could not persuade her to take sustenance or go to bed. Carey's words are often quoted because they reverse the hierarchy of the household. Ordinarily, one royal command mobilised hundreds. Now dozens of pleas could not move one weakened woman. Councillors might govern counties and armies, but they could not make Elizabeth lie down. Ladies who had spent their lives anticipating her wishes were trapped when her wish became self-destruction. Obedience and care pulled in opposite directions. Robert Cecil reportedly told her that she must go to bed. Elizabeth answered that must was not a word to use to princes, addressing him with the contemptuous diminutive of a much taller authority compressed into little man. The line fits her character so perfectly that it has become emblematic. Whether every syllable was preserved exactly, it expresses a lifelong principle. Elizabeth had survived because others failed to tell her what she must be. Obedient wife, condemned traitor, Catholic princess, political puppet. At Richmond, that principle had nowhere left to go except refusal of care. The attendants adapted. If she would not use the bed, they made the floor softer. Cushions spread around her. Clothing and blankets had to be adjusted. A close stool or vessel had to be brought near because she could not move easily. Liquids were offered. The room required cleaning while she remained in it. Fires had to maintain warmth without making the air unbearable. Every bodily need that ceremony normally placed behind a door now occurred within a prolonged vigil. Imagine the physical strain on the women beside her. They could rotate duties, but sleep was broken. They listened for speech that might indicate a wish about succession, religion, or comfort. They watched counsellors enter with urgent questions. They interpreted gesture when words failed. They had to touch a body that the political world treated as untouchable. As Elizabeth weakened, the servants' practical authority increased. Someone had to decide when to lift, cover, clean, or call a physician. The Queen's refusal of food created another ritual of failure. Kitchens could prepare anything available, but appetite could not be commanded. Broth, cordial, wine, soft food, or sweetened medicine might reach the chamber and return untouched. Each rejected cup travelled backward through hands. In a country where poor families faced hunger, the sovereign died surrounded by food she would not take. The contrast is stark, but not simple. Starvation at the bottom came from deprivation. At the top, refusal emerged from illness, grief, will, or incapacity. Both ended in a body consuming itself. Some accounts mention swelling in the throat or glands that later broke or subsided. If true, infection may have made swallowing painful. Dental disease could also contribute to systemic illness, though proof is impossible. Here the Queen's black teeth return not as a comic image, but as a medical possibility. The mouth that had issued commands for 45 years may have become a source of pain and infection. The scented cloths and sweet remedies of earlier decades could not reverse decay. As speech diminished, politics listened more intensely. Did Elizabeth name James as successor? Later reports claimed she made a gesture or gave an answer indicating him. The council needed legitimacy for a transition already prepared through Cecil's secret correspondence. A clear nomination would be useful. The Queen had avoided naming an heir because a successor attracts a court before the ruler is dead. Now, as she lost the strength to control the question, others interpreted her body. This was the ultimate invasion of privacy. A movement of the hand could become constitutional evidence. A nod might be translated into a kingdom. Servants near the bed or cushions saw the difference between deliberate speech and desperate interpretation, but their exact observations did not become a universally agreed record. The succession moved forward because political necessity demanded certainty where the room offered ambiguity. John Whitgift, Archbishop of Canterbury, attended and prayed. Elizabeth had maintained a complex relationship with her church, defending royal supremacy while resisting some Protestant demands. Near death, prayer surrounded her. Whether she responded clearly throughout is uncertain. Later generations supplied suitably pious scenes and memorable last words. The phrase, "all my possessions for one moment of time," is commonly attributed to her, but is almost certainly apocryphal. Dying people rarely compose the lines history wants from them. The truer final language may have been breath, gesture, and silence. A servant moistening lips. A physician touching a pulse. A counsellor whispering outside. Fabric moving as the Queen was finally placed in bed. According to Carey, those around her eventually got her there. The bed that had represented privacy, fertility, danger, and authority became simply the place where a dying woman lay. Elizabeth died in the early hours of March 24, 1603, probably between 2 and 3 in the morning. She was 69 years old and in the 70th year of her life by contemporary counting. Her reign had lasted more than 44 years. The moment could not remain private. Almost immediately the body ceased to be the Queen in law, and the household's allegiance shifted to James VI of Scotland, now James I of England. Carey's behaviour after the death shows how quickly service turned into competition. Determined to carry the news to James, he obtained a token, traditionally a ring, from his sister Lady Scrope, and rode north with extraordinary speed. He hoped to secure the new king's favour by arriving first. The dead queen had scarcely cooled before courtiers converted access to her last hours into opportunity under her successor. At Richmond, attendants remained with the corpse. All the daily acts of transformation stopped. There would be no washing for another audience, no rejected gown, no impatient correction. Instead, the body entered a new process of preservation and ceremony. It was washed and prepared. Embalming was intended to slow decay during the long period before burial. A lead shell would help contain the remains inside a wooden coffin. Elizabeth Southwell's account says the Queen had not wished to be opened after death, but that surgeons embalmed her on Robert Cecil's orders. The exact extent of the procedure and the reliability of every detail remain debated. Royal embalming often involved removing internal organs, treating cavities, wrapping the body, and enclosing it carefully. For attendants who had guarded Elizabeth's modesty in life, the intervention could feel like a final violation. The political body required public mourning. The natural body had to be made safe enough to support it. Southwell also described a loud crack from the coffin during the night watch, attributing it to the pressure of noxious vapours within the corpse. Retellings inflate this into the Queen's body exploding. Decomposition can produce gases, and a sealed or poorly managed body can create disturbing sounds and damage. But we should not picture a sensational cinematic blast without evidence. What matters is the terror of the women keeping vigil. The Queen, who had controlled every gesture, now underwent changes no servant could command. For several days the coffin remained at Richmond. It was then taken by barge down the Thames to Whitehall. The river that had carried Elizabeth as a princess, prisoner, sovereign and traveller now carried her enclosed body. From the banks observers saw velvet, banners, attendants and formal mourning. Inside the coffin, lead separated the public from decay. At Whitehall the body lay in state for weeks. Southwell wrote that 6 ladies watched each night. The vigil extended service beyond death. Women who had guarded the sleeping Queen now guarded a coffin. They no longer responded to a voice, but ceremony demanded presence. Candles burned, prayers were said, the room filled with wax, fabric, incense or herbs, and the heavy stillness of waiting. The delay before the funeral required constant maintenance. Cloths gathered dust, candles needed replacement, guards rotated, heralds prepared the order of procession, tailors and makers worked on mourning garments and the funeral effigy. Officials arranged precedents because even grief followed rank. The dead Queen's household became a production, preparing the last and greatest appearance of her reign. On April 28, 1603, London saw the funeral procession move toward Westminster Abbey. The coffin, covered in purple velvet, rode on a chariot drawn by 4 horses dressed in black. On top lay a coloured wooden effigy of Elizabeth in royal robes. The natural body remained hidden in lead and wood. The public body appeared above it, crowned, dressed, smooth-faced and whole. This final image completed the logic of Elizabethan monarchy. Death had made the Queen physically unviewable, so servants and craftsmen made another Elizabeth. The effigy possessed no black teeth, no sour breath, no wrinkles beyond what artists chose, no fear of bed, and no bodily waste. It did not need cushions. It could be displayed without risk. The crowd mourned an image carried above a concealed corpse. Westminster Abbey records that thousands came, and that observers remembered extraordinary sighing, groaning, and weeping. Some mourned sincerely. Elizabeth was the only monarch many had known. Her reign, despite war and repression, had provided dynastic continuity after the rapid upheavals of Henry VIII, Edward VI, and Mary I. Others feared the unknown. James was male, adult, Protestant, married, and a father, promising succession stability. But he was also Scottish, absent, and unfamiliar. Public grief could contain relief, anxiety, habit, and theatre at once. James did not attend the funeral. His government inherited Elizabeth's servants, jewels, palaces, debts, enemies, and myths. The transition scattered the female household. Some women retired. Some sought positions with James's queen, Anne of Denmark. Mary Radcliffe helped transfer jewels that had passed through Elizabeth's hands. Objects moved more smoothly between reigns than relationships did. Elizabeth was first placed in the vault of her grandfather, Henry VII. In 1606, her coffin was moved beneath a new monument erected by James in the north aisle of Henry VII's chapel. There it was placed above the coffin of her half-sister Mary I. The Protestant queen and Catholic queen, rivals in life and memory, shared a vault. An inscription later acknowledged them as partners in throne and grave, awaiting resurrection. Across the chapel, James eventually raised a magnificent monument to his mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, whose execution Elizabeth had authorised. The architecture of Westminster turned old conflict into permanent proximity. Elizabeth and Mary Stuart lie in opposing aisles, represented by serene effigies. The bodies that had generated decades of fear are silent beneath stone. The original funeral effigy of Elizabeth did not remain unchanged. Its surviving elements were altered over time, and the head was remade in wax in the 18th century. Remarkably, the original corset associated with the 1603 effigy survives. It preserves the dimensions of a constructed royal body more directly than any rumour about makeup. Visitors can encounter not Elizabeth's flesh, but the structure used to represent it after death. Her marble tomb effigy was once coloured. Today it appears pale stone, but early evidence shows painted robes, flesh colour, and gilded details. Time has washed away the surface, producing another misleading whiteness. What modern visitors see as austere permanence was once bright political theatre. Even the monument has lost its makeup. Richmond Palace largely disappeared. Stone was reused, buildings demolished, and the private rooms of Elizabeth's death vanished from ordinary sight. Whitehall burned in the late 17th century, leaving only fragments of the immense complex. Greenwich Palace was replaced. Hampton Court survives more fully, though later rebuilding transformed it. Visitors walk through Tudor spaces polished by conservation, no longer crowded by hundreds of sweating courtiers, fires, animals, kitchens, and waste. The palace is visually present and sensorially absent. This absence shapes modern misunderstanding. Museum rooms are quiet, tapestries are cleaned, toilets are modern and hidden behind signs. Visitors do not smell a royal progress after several weeks. They do not hear servants arguing over bedding or feel the heat of a working kitchen at full capacity. The surviving architecture looks grand enough to support the portrait myth. To recover private life, imagination must be disciplined by material evidence. At Hampton Court, interpretation of Tudor sanitation now challenges the claim that people never washed. The palace had private garderobes for important lodgings, communal facilities for lower ranks, and systems of washing and linen care. The king's bath could receive hot and cold water. Such features do not make the 16th century modern. They show that comfort and cleanliness were valued, unevenly distributed, and limited by technology. Elizabeth inhabited this inherited culture of royal hygiene, not a fantasy of total unwashed darkness. At the Queen's house in Greenwich, the Armada portrait presents a ruler with ships behind her and the world beneath her hand. At the Royal Collection and other galleries, repeated faces show how carefully the image was controlled. Stand before them long enough and the symbolism becomes almost loud. Pearls proclaim chastity. A globe suggests reach. A crown asserts legitimacy. Eyes and ears imply surveillance. None depicts a laundress. The absence is itself evidence. Portraits were designed to make labour disappear. A ruff appears as perfect geometry without starchwoman or pin. A jewel floats upon fabric without keeper, goldsmith or embroiderer. Skin shines without basin, cloth, pigment, age or pain. The viewer is invited to believe that magnificence emanated naturally from Elizabeth. The household records expose the trick without destroying the achievement. The Blackened textile, associated by researchers with Elizabethan royal dress and preserved in the church linked to Blanche Parry, offers a different encounter. Its embroidery is dense with flowers, animals, and intricate metallic thread. Whether every part of its royal attribution can be stated with absolute certainty, the cloth makes labour visible. A needle moved through fabric thousands of times. Someone planned the pattern. Someone financed the materials. Someone wore or guarded it. Someone transformed it for another use. Survival depended on hands after the Queen's death. Blanche's monument at Bacton preserves her claim of extraordinary service. Cat Ashley survives through letters, interrogations, and biographies. Bess Raleigh emerges from her marriage, punishment, and later life. Mary Scudamore appears in correspondence and reports of the Queen's anger. Mary Radcliffe appears in the transfer of jewels. Elizabeth Southwell appears because she wrote about death. Yet countless others remain phrases in accounts: laundress, chamberer, silkwoman, starcher, maid, nurse, washer, carrier. Their anonymity should change how we understand revelation. The people who served Elizabeth did not gather after her death to destroy her reputation. Most revelations are accidental. An accountant recorded 24 ells of linen because payment mattered. A traveller noted black teeth because they surprised him. A courtier described cushions because he wanted to place himself near the transition of power. A young woman wrote of a corpse because the night frightened her. History assembled a private queen from fragments created for other purposes. Those fragments also reveal tenderness. Service was not only cleaning waste, it was remembering how a frightened child survived the execution of her mother. It was remaining beside a prisoner in the tower. It was cooling a fever, fastening a familiar jewel, reading during sleeplessness, and arranging cushions when pride refused bed. The same hands that touched dirty linen may have been the hands Elizabeth trusted most. They reveal fear. A secret marriage could bring blows, dismissal, or imprisonment. A poorly timed word could damage a family. An unexplained object near the Queen might arouse suspicion of poison. A servant knew too much to be entirely safe, and possessed too little rank to control how that knowledge was used. They reveal exploitation. Royal comfort transferred physical burden downward. Waste left the chamber because someone carried it. Clean linen returned because someone scrubbed it. Palaces smelled sweeter because herbs were gathered, bought, boiled, and burned. The Queen's delayed bedtime extended another woman's shift. A progress dazzled towns while hosts borrowed money and labourers hauled supplies. They reveal skill. Dressing Elizabeth required technical knowledge. Laundering fine linen without destroying it required judgment. Managing access required political intelligence. Nursing without modern medicine demanded observation and endurance. To call these women mere servants is to miss the expertise upon which monarchy depended. And they reveal Elizabeth herself as neither goddess nor monster. She was intellectually formidable, politically cautious, theatrically gifted, and capable of inspiring loyalty. She could forgive. She could remember. She could charm a room. She could also humiliate, strike, imprison, and demand control over the lives of women close to her. She understood image as power, because enemies attacked her through gender and legitimacy. She used that understanding brilliantly, and others paid part of its cost. Was she physically unpleasant in old age? Almost certainly at times, as almost every human being can be. Contemporary evidence supports black or badly damaged teeth. Tooth loss could affect breath and speech. Heavy clothing, crowded palaces, limited sanitation, illness and age created odours modern visitors would notice immediately. Bodily waste was managed in close stools and chamber pots. Servants encountered all of it. Was she uniquely filthy by the standards of her time? The evidence does not support that conclusion. She had access to washing, clean linen, laundresses, scented water, baths, perfumes, physicians, and carefully maintained rooms. Tudor people did not avoid all water, and royal households invested in cleanliness. The people nearest Elizabeth likely saw more washing, not less, than most ordinary English people could afford. Did poisonous white makeup destroy her face and kill her? Lead cosmetics existed, and toxic preparations were possible, but the confident modern story outruns the documentation. We do not know the exact ingredients or frequency of everything applied to Elizabeth's skin. We do not know her cause of death. The inch-thick mask belongs more securely to legend than to evidence. Repeating it as fact turns historical uncertainty into entertainment. Did servants expose hidden sexual secrets? No credible evidence proves secret children, concealed pregnancies, or the many affairs later imagination has assigned to her. Her attendants' proximity fueled rumour precisely because they occupied inaccessible rooms. Silence became an empty surface onto which outsiders projected fantasies. The most intimate confirmed facts are ordinary: washing, dressing, illness, aging, grief, anger, eating, sleeping, and dying. These ordinary facts are powerful because Elizabeth's regime made them appear extraordinary. Her political image separated her from time. The Virgin Queen never became wife, mother, or widow. Painted youth remained while the natural body aged. Servants watched both timelines at once. Each morning they worked on the aging woman and released the timeless queen. Modern public life still depends on this division. Political leaders, celebrities, and corporate figures appear beneath controlled light in selected images. Assistants manage schedules, clothing, rooms, food, transport, and access. Cleaners arrive before cameras. Makeup artists conceal fatigue. Editors smooth skin. Public relations teams translate private disorder into public confidence. The technology has changed. The desire to make power look effortless has not. We are also still fascinated by the moment the image fails. A candid photograph, a leaked message, an unguarded expression, or a story from former staff promises access to the real person. Sometimes exposure reveals abuse that must be known. Sometimes it merely invites mockery of age, illness, or the body. Elizabeth's afterlife warns us to distinguish accountability from humiliation. Her treatment of attendants deserves accountability. Secret marriages could provoke punishments that violated personal autonomy. Temper could become physical violence. Patronage could reward dependence in silence. The magnificence of the royal household rested on profound inequality. None of this becomes less real because Elizabeth faced misogyny herself. A person can be constrained by a system and still wield it against others. Her aging body deserves something different: accuracy. Black teeth are not evidence of evil. Wrinkles are not political failure. Hair loss is not divine judgment. Refusing food in depression or illness is not vanity. The dying queen on cushions is disturbing because she was suffering, not because suffering made her disgusting. The people closest to her understood that distinction better than distant spectators. They may have feared odour, resented demands, or whispered about appearance. They also stayed. They lifted. They cleaned. They guarded. They turned her in bed. They held cups. They waited through silence. Service brought them close to what power spends its greatest energy denying: dependence. On the morning after Elizabeth's death, England did not stop. Fires were lit, pots were emptied, horses were saddled, proclamations were prepared for James, wardrobes were opened and inventories checked. The women who had built one queen's daily image faced a new court with different tastes and loyalties. Gloriana became memory, while labour continued. The funeral effigy rode above the coffin for one final reason. A kingdom could not mourn decay. It needed form: crown, robes, face, hands, and recognisable authority. Yet beneath the effigy lay the body the servants had known. The two Elizabeths travelled together through London, one visible and one sealed away. That procession remains the clearest image of her private truth. Above, the immaculate queen, untouched by time, carried through a grieving capital. Below, the mortal woman, enclosed in lead because flesh changes, no matter how many portraits command it not to. Around both, attendants, heralds, horses, makers, guards, mourners, and unnamed workers carrying the weight. To recover those workers now, we must leave the palace and enter the archive. There, the private world survives in a form almost opposite to drama. Rows of handwriting record cloth, wages, food, candles, horse fodder, jewels, gifts, and repairs. The language is repetitive because repetition was the household's foundation. One entry may authorise linen for the laundress. Another notes fabric issued for a sleeve. Another records a jewel delivered from one keeper to the next. Read separately, each seems small. Read together, they reveal a body surrounded by logistics. The archive has its own hierarchy. A chief gentlewoman may appear with title, family, and property. A supplier may be named because money changed hands. A low servant may be identified only by occupation. Sometimes a woman is visible only as somebody's wife or widow. Spellings shift. Payments are delayed. Whole years vanish. The absence of a name does not mean the absence of a life. It means that the institution did not need that life recorded in greater detail. This is why exact numbers can mislead. Popular accounts boast that Elizabeth owned thousands of gowns, while inventories may count separate components, surviving pieces, textiles, gifts, or wardrobe categories in ways that do not correspond to a modern closet. The abundance was enormous, but precision demands care. A sensational number makes the queen look extravagantly vain. A wardrobe book shows something more interesting. Garments were living objects, repeatedly altered, repaired, disassembled, combined, gifted, and guarded by a workforce. The same caution applies to bathing. A lack of daily entries saying that Elizabeth washed does not prove she did not wash. Routine acts often left fewer records than costly purchases or unusual events. Water drawn within a palace might not generate a bill. A basin already owned did not need to be purchased every morning. Clean linen appears more clearly because fabric, labour, and replacement cost money. The historian must reason from systems without inventing a schedule the sources do not provide. Odour leaves even less evidence. A written page cannot preserve smell. We reconstruct it from architecture, fuel, food, population, waste systems, textiles, weather, and contemporary attempts to perfume or fumigate. The result is not a single permanent stench. A newly aired chamber scented with rosewater might be pleasant. A crowded corridor near a privy after weeks of residence might be overpowering. Rain, summer heat, winter smoke, illness, and the movement of the court changed the atmosphere. The past smelled different from hour to hour, just as it looked different before and after the servants worked. Physical objects add another layer. A toothpick proves attention to teeth, not a healthy mouth. A close stool proves an effort to make bodily relief private and comfortable, not the absence of odour. A washing basin proves the availability of washing, not its exact frequency. A portrait proves an approved representation, not the thickness of cosmetic on a particular day. A corset from a funeral effigy proves how the dead queen was shaped for display, not every measurement of her living body. Evidence speaks most clearly when we do not force it to say more than it can. Hostile gossip must be handled with equal discipline. An enemy's insult may preserve a truth excluded from flattering sources, but hostility also exaggerates. A foreign ambassador might notice missing teeth accurately while mocking exposed skin, according to his own expectations. A later writer might preserve a genuine memory of Elizabeth's temper while sharpening the anecdote for entertainment. The story of the broken finger, the inch of makeup, the hidden ring, the false mirror, and the exploding coffin each requires a different degree of confidence. Drama becomes stronger, not weaker, when uncertainty is made visible. Servants themselves had reasons to shape memory. Robert Carey emphasised his presence because proximity to Elizabeth's death enhanced the story of his ride to James. Elizabeth Southwell wrote within a religious and political environment in which ominous signs mattered. Long-serving women commemorated loyalty because service brought honour to their families. Accounts were not neutral windows. They were actions performed after the event. Even silence could be an action. A lady who never wrote about the Queen's naked body may have been protecting dignity, protecting herself, or simply considering the details unworthy of record. Modern audiences sometimes treat missing scandal as evidence of suppression. More often, it reflects a culture with different boundaries. The chamber's deepest knowledge may have died with the women who held it. That loss should make us cautious about claiming to expose Elizabeth completely. No surviving narrative can tell us exactly how she felt when attendants removed her wig, whether she feared her reflection, how often tooth pain woke her, or what private joke last made her laugh. Historical intimacy has a horizon. Beyond it, certainty becomes fiction. But the horizon does not leave us empty. We know enough to see the system. We can follow linen from merchant to needle, from royal skin to laundry, and back to the chamber. We can follow sugar from international commerce to the elite table and into Hentzner's description of black teeth. We can follow a secret marriage from whispered courtship to pregnancy, royal anger, prison, and ruined access. We can follow cushions from furniture to the floor beneath a dying queen. These chains make private life historical rather than merely personal. They also restore moral proportion. The court's most unpleasant physical tasks were often performed by the least visible people, but bodily dirt was not the worst harm produced by the reign. Religious persecution killed, war maimed. Colonial ventures opened paths toward exploitation. Monopolies burdened consumers. Poverty exposed thousands to hunger and disease without royal attendance. If we spend all our horror on one woman's breath, we risk making bad hygiene more memorable than state violence. At the same time, the chamber matters because large systems become tangible there. Sugar's global history enters a tooth. Patriarchy enters a servant's punished marriage. Class inequality enters a basin carried by tired hands. Propaganda enters a painted face. Succession politics enters the interpretation of a dying gesture. The room is small, but the world passes through it. The women serving Elizabeth were positioned at that intersection. They were not modern investigative reporters, and many would have rejected the idea that bodily exposure served truth. Their work was to conceal, protect, and perfect. Paradoxically, the traces of that concealment now reveal more than deliberate scandal could. A record of starch tells us how the ruff stood. A payment to a laundress tells us where sweat went. Security instructions about chamberers' rooms tell us how poison was feared. The backstage survives because it cost money. There is dignity in reading these records slowly. It resists the speed of the sensational title. Disgusting promises instant reversal. The admired queen was secretly repulsive. The archive gives a more demanding answer. She could be unpleasant, ill, angry, controlling, and physically decayed. She could also be clean by the standards and resources of her age, deeply loved, intellectually alive, and vulnerable. The servant's world contains all of these truths without arranging them into a simple verdict. More than 4 centuries later, the upper image still dominates. We remember pearls, red hair, the Armada, Tilbury, and the white face. But if we listen carefully to the household record, another sound rises beneath the ceremony. Water poured into a basin, starch worked into linen, a pot lifted from a close stool, a whispered warning at a guarded door, a cup refused, cushions placed on the floor. These sounds do not diminish Elizabeth. They restore scale. Her reign changed religion, diplomacy, literature, maritime ambition, and the political possibilities of female rule. She faced threats that might have destroyed a less disciplined monarch. She also inhabited a body that demanded daily care from people with less freedom than she possessed. Greatness and dependence were never opposites. They were stitched together. What her servants finally revealed was not that the Virgin Queen was secretly a monster. It was that virginity, majesty, and national myth could not cancel digestion, pain, temper, loneliness, or age. They revealed that every icon has a backstage, and backstage there are always hands doing the work the audience is not meant to see. The most disturbing truth is therefore not the smell of Elizabeth's breath, or the contents of her chamber pot. It is how readily history preserves the face of power, while erasing the people who kept that face clean. It is how quickly we call an old woman disgusting for failing to remain identical to her portrait. It is how power turns care into invisibility, then claims to stand alone. At Westminster, Elizabeth lies above Mary I in a shared vault. Nearby, stone and marble hold the memory of dynastic conflict. Visitors pass beneath fan vaulting, looking up at monuments designed to defeat time. Yet the real bridge between that world and ours is not marble. It is the human need hidden beneath it, to be washed when weak, comforted when afraid, corrected when cruel, remembered when gone. Elizabeth's attendants knew the Queen at the distance of a breath. They knew the heat inside the gown, the weight of the jewels, the damage behind the smile, and the silence after command. Their evidence strips away perfection, but it also strips away caricature. What remains is harder to judge and impossible to forget. A brilliant ruler, a difficult mistress, an aging woman, and a household of people who made history every day without being allowed to appear inside its frame. And perhaps that is the final secret of the private chamber. Power does not become human only when it falls. It is human all along. The crown can hide that fact from a crowd. It cannot hide it from the person holding the basin.